Hello, happy listeners. You're hearing my latest toy, a Tibetan singing bowl. Pretty good, isn't it? Love it. Really soothing. I'll put it down, otherwise we'll have a little podcast purely of badly played Tibetan singing bowl music. Okay, thanks for joining me. What is today's quickfire mental health chat about? Well, I've been lucky and privileged to be mentoring a couple of people recently, and the same issues keep coming up with both of these guys, and those issues are linked to our ego, or their ego, and the demands it places, and the mental tricks it plays on us, and how those tricks can lead us astray and really take us to dark places. It's an issue I have had to battle with, and to be honest, during my, let's call it a progression down into depression, the ego was my biggest demon. I didn't know it at the time, because it is quite a confusing concept, isn't it? That the ego, which we think is part of us and is linked to us, and for many it's an intrinsic part of us, it's what drives us on, it's what we think leads us to success. It's a confusing thing, a difficult thing to grasp, that it might not be what we think it is. And I'm not really clever enough to explain how and why it works. But I'll leave that to a guy called Professor Steve Peters, who wrote a book called The Chimp Paradox. And in it, he explains that essentially the human brain, our brain, is made up of two brains. One of them is the human brain, the rational, the calm, the intelligent, the sensible voice inside our head. And there's a second brain, which Professor Peters calls the chimp, which I think is essentially the ego, because the chimp is driven by instinct, it's driven by emotion, it's driven by desire, it's driven by demands. And it's this voice that essentially wants us to have all those shiny little trinkets that life seems to have on offer. You know the ones, the new car, the brand new shiny powerful car, the bigger house, because the one we've got just ain't good enough, right? The flashy designer clothing, the shoes, the handbags, the jewellery, that important job with the huge salary, and more importantly sometimes, the job title, which denotes power, which gives us money, which the ego thinks therefore leads to things like sex. I kind of look at it as the subconscious, a product of all those messages that we fed from life, be it family, be it employers, be it the media, be it the news, be it books, be it cinema, all those messages about what constitutes success and ultimately what constitutes happiness. You know, those things that we need to be happy. Because when you really look at it, what we're being told is the things we have now, the person we are at the moment, is not enough. We need more. We need to be more to become happy. But when does it stop? When do we stop needing more? And the trouble is, the ego is never satisfied. Mine, when it wasn't given the trinkets, when it wasn't given the jobs, it wasn't given the money, the holidays, the houses, all that gubbings, it turned against me. And that's what happens in depressive episodes. The ego, that voice inside your head, turns against you. I think it's true of anxiety as well, although I've not suffered with that. So in my case, it began to torture me by turning against me. It would remind me and berate me about all the mistakes I'd made, all those failures and defeats I'd suffered in life, or as it saw it, I'd suffered. It would tell me repeatedly that I'd let my family down, I'd failed at life, I was useless, I should be ashamed because I couldn't give it what it wanted, I was a catastrophe, my life was a disaster, and ultimately, when it really got out of control, it would tell me I was definitely better off not being here. I almost believed it. I almost didn't escape that torture. I nearly didn't make it. The ego almost took me to the brink. However, I was very fortunate to be introduced to mindfulness. And mindfulness gradually began to slow my thinking down and give me an awareness of what was going on. Mindfulness and the peace that it brought, and the tranquility and the distance it brought from the voices and from life, it enabled me to recognize when the ego raised its ugly head, because it is ugly, let's face it. I was able to spot it and begin to acknowledge when it was speaking, and also recognize the lies it was telling me, because mindfulness enabled me to accept and recognize that thoughts aren't always real. In fact, thoughts aren't real. They're just thoughts. And what you can do with thoughts, once you put that distance between you and them, is you can catch them and you can stop them and you can change them. It was Wayne Dyer who uttered that famous phrase, and hopefully you've heard it, that if you change your thoughts, you can change your world. I rephrase it a little bit. Change your thoughts, change your life. And that's what I was able to do. I was able to stop the ego in its tracks, shut it up, and take control of the thoughts and choose which thoughts I wanted to think about. Don't get me wrong, the ego is still there. It's connected to us. We never ultimately get rid of it, I don't think. But I can separate myself from it. I can spot it. I can silence its lies, and I can push them away. I don't have to listen to it. I'm bigger than it. I'm different from it. And I don't need to be linked to it. So the first step for me was getting that awareness, getting that distance, putting that space between me and the ego, and mindfulness did it for me. And once I saw the ego for what it was, ultimately a false and destructive voice, I was able to expose it in my own mind and free myself from it. And that was an incredible moment of liberation, which I've grasped onto and kept hold of from that day forward. What it means is that the ego no longer plays much of a part in my life. It no longer dictates my decisions and actions. And when it tries, I can move away from it. I can choose whether to listen to it or not. And 95% of the time, possibly even more, I choose not to listen, because it is destructive and it is wrong in what it demands and how it says happiness is shaped. I don't need to listen to its lies. I hope it's helped. I know it's a complex thing to get hold of, but as I said, when I got hold of it, when I understood it, it quite literally, almost overnight, changed my life. When I could silence the ego, I could begin to move away from depression and towards a more hopeful future. I hope this has helped. I'll sign off by having another little play on my new toy, the Tibetan singing bowl. I hope you join me again. Namaste.